Hi, we're back to talk to Harry without Harry. My name is Butch Valdez. I am here with my good friend Art Alvendia. Both of us are from Citizen National Guard. And we're just talking about the previous segment. We were discussing the beginnings of what are we moving towards a Philippine Renaissance. No? And he mentioned earlier that the institutions have to be looked into very closely and to see to it that those institutions that are intact will function in the way that the people would want it. What had happened is these institutions have failed in the previous administrations, not just because of corruption, but because of attitude, as he had pointed out. Now, I'd like Art to continue with that thought. Go ahead, Art.
Yeah, as I said, the starting point is of course the heart, but this has to be translated into what I call an institutional infrastructure in a whole system. No? This is really the elements of which are government. I mean, of course, fundamental policies like the Constitution, laws, like your EPIRA law that you were beginning to sign. This can become barriers actually to change. But even more fundamental than that, actually, the Constitution. I mean, this is the very basis of changes in legislation. Now, if you put the wrong foundation, if the foundation is not there, then
saan ka na
wala ka na, saan ka na pupuntahan.
Maliligaw ka na.
And then, thirdly, of course, then the laws follow through the fund allocation, the policies. And
well, recently, Art, we just want to focus on this particular thing because we might not have time to discuss this at length. Recently, great news has been published that the President had decided to give the go signal to the Energy Secretary, Cusi, and is allocating $1 billion for the rehabilitation of the Bataan nuclear power plant.
that's great.
Many have reacted to this positively. I have not yet heard any negative reaction to this, except, of course, later on we expect from the pseudo-environmentalists and even from the, sometimes they wear the same hat, the pseudo-environmentalists and the leftists. But this is cause for celebration because the impact of starting the rehabilitation of the nuclear power plant may precisely be the start of a Philippine Renaissance. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, as you know, the power rates in this country have become the highest in the world.
Highest in the world, yes.
You know, of course, in the past, actually, it was a model. Our energy sector was a model for, and the World Bank even cited it. But you know, when we shifted from a regulatory system where we were regulating power rates on a cost-plus basis, and shifting to a market-driven, competition, the theory that their thesis is competition will bring down prices. This is the economic thesis behind the EPIRA law. And this has been proven to be very, very wrong. Why? Because the fact is, a free market system cannot work in a country that is virtually cartelized, ruled by large capitalists. So competition has actually just brought up the prices. So the danger now in the nuclear development, I'm very happy about that. That you now have a low price that hopefully will bring down the prices as they compete. But it just may not, because you don't know what will happen to that price, if that is, for example, sold by another private entity that just makes profit
Right.
on the low cost. It pockets the efficiency.
Yeah.
And in fact, this is what has happened to many of our power projects.
Yeah. If the nuclear power generated will be given to the private sector.
Yeah.
On the other hand, no,
Yeah.
if it is retained by government sector, because it seems people do not realize it that the Bataan nuclear power plant is not part of the National Power Corporation assets. This is retained by the Philippine government. And the rehabilitation of this plant means the government is the one that owns it and does not necessarily have to get it privatized. No? Once you have it privatized, then the risk of what you're saying will come true. But if the government decides to get into power generation
Yes.
and includes this in the power distribution, power transmission and distribution, the tendency, I believe, is to bring and pull down the prices. We don't know how much, no, but it will have a tendency, because if you average out the pricing, no, the average price will, of course, be lowered if there is a low-priced energy. Just to give you an idea, people don't realize the impact of a nuclear power rates, energy rates. We are now paying upwards of 12 pesos per kilowatt hour. 12 pesos, 13, 14. Sometimes, depending on the fluctuation, it can go all the way up to 15 pesos per kilowatt hour. The power generation that the power cost that we intend to generate, if the Bataan nuclear power plant starts, will be pushing 1 peso per kilowatt hour. Only 1 peso versus 14 pesos per kilowatt hour. If you put that into the grid, this 1 peso, no matter how small in terms of the weighted average thing, will still tend to bring down the price of electricity. If you have more nuclear power plants owned by government to get into the grid, the more that price is going to go down. No? As long as it is not privatized. No? Okay. This is the important thing to consider, and I hope our government people, especially those that are close to President Duterte, should explain this to him, no, correctly. I do not trust his economic managers like Ben Jokno and Pernia, because these people were advocates of the APIRA law. No? They were practically even those that might have formed the APIRA law by privatizing energy and giving it to the private sector. No? But these are different times. We need a creative and courageous president and leader that will implement this.
Yeah, and this is where, in fact, I'm glad you titled our talk Towards a Philippine Renaissance, because we're not yet actually there.
Not yet there. Not yet there.
We have, there are these overhanging policies, these invested interests who have been protecting their interests to the institutional system, the laws, the APIRA law, for example. Yeah. These are the barriers that we have to address. And now that we're talking about charter change, I think this is the area, for example, the role of government in development.
Right.
This is a critical area, and this is a good time for the president to really bring home, his legacy of empowering people, developing industries, rather than just talk of employment. We really should be talking about developing industries.
That's right. And that is the direction that Citizen National Guard has actually pushed.
Yeah.
Some members of the Citizen National Guard at that time, myself, then also with now who passed away already, Dean Roger Posadas, a preeminent scientist from University of the Philippines. And of course, you have Ramon Pedrosa and certain other people. We put together a proposal and submitted it to the president. And this proposal was entitled Renaissance Philippines.
Ah,
Okay. Why? Because we felt this proposal was on the rationalization of the energy sector of our country, focused on developing nuclear energy all over the country. No? And we had given, I think, it's going to be very tough to try to beat this proposal, because the proposal, as we had done it with our own computations, we feel that we can develop nuclear energy in the Philippines by putting up maybe up to 10 or 12 different nuclear power plants at no cost to the government.
the question is, what vehicle will you use to make those investments? You see, in the EPIRA law, there is actually a provision that prohibits government
Yes.
for investing in the energy sector.
Yes.
And
Yes.
this seems to be a permanent block to any role
Yes,
of government to
I know.
develop an industry, energy industry.
That part of it will have to be addressed by no less than the president.
Yes.
No? And this was, to me, almost treasonous on the part of the leadership before, when they allowed such a law. No? In effect, they had prevented government from intervening to protect the population, no? In favor of the private sector. To me, that was treasonous as it was. No?
Actually, it's contrary to the previous charter, because in the previous constitution, there was a provision that government should protect the so-called critical strategic industries, basic industries.
Yes.
And that's why you had the beginnings of industry development during Marcos' time.
Yeah.
But that's where it
You
started.
don't have to you say sorry about that, because it was Marcos who had this 11-point industrialization program. And an 11-point industrialization program that hinged on an energy development program, which had three base load generators, power generating concepts, which included the hydroelectric, the geothermal, and the nuclear.
Yes.
And if that plan was pushed, we would have been energy self-sufficient by 1990. No? But of course, that never happened, because the EDSA one intervened and prevented this thing, no? Prevented this ability for agro-industrial development of our country. And for the past 30 years, no, our people have been suffering.
You know, Butch, I don't know if it came up in our conversation, but I used to be in charge of power sector during that time. But,
Yes.
and, you know, when we came out with the nationalization law, we nationalized power generation. The basic rationale for that was really because government had the access to long-term funding resources, 40-year money at low, very single-digit interest rates.
Yeah.
And because of that, and if you had, the rationale was, if you had long-term money and you now go on a cost-plus basis, no? In other words, you cover your financial costs, you cover your operating costs, and then charge power at a return, a reasonable return of, say, 12% over that cost, then you would have a very much lower price than what you have right now. No?
Right.
So the task is really just to do good regulation. Of course, the problem, of course, then was, and as I see it now, that government corporations were really not really geared up to do management. I mean, real-time response to market. But, you know, government can own and finance these resources. And then maybe private sector can be
Yeah.
the one to manage.
Well, well, on the part of the BNPP, one of the reasons why this could be done, as we proposed it, is that the BNPP is already free of debt.
Yes.
And being free of debt, it does not have that capital expenditure burden, no?
Yeah.
And that everything was going to be of operating income, no? And that the funds were going to be enough to fund the next small and medium scale type of nuclear power reactor, no? And so on and so forth. Because here, when you put these things together, the more you have the capacity to fund new nuclear power plants. But since you mentioned something about the financing, it is a fact that towards the end of the Marcos regime, well, from the middle all towards the end, the World Bank and the other financial institutions no longer were interested in funding major infrastructure projects, most especially in energy. And they started going, the interest went higher and higher until the point that they were not going to fund any more power generating systems.
Yeah.
Now, so that says a lot, no, on the part of the financial institutions, the international financial institutions. They know that infrastructure of this kind, especially in energy, will need a lot of funding. And since it is infrastructure, it needs a lot of, it should be long term, and it should pay for itself. No? But if you withhold that and push the countries towards commercial loans, no? Commercial loan rates will not be proper for infrastructure. No? And this is what was being made available to us, no? Commercial loan rates. And that's why we started having difficulties. I think Marcos looked for other means, no, to be able to fund this nuclear power plant, and he did. No? I don't know exactly what other means he had. No?
I happen to be.
Yes,
I happen
yes.
to be in
Go,
the
yeah.
the nuclear finance team, no,
Okay.
that raised the funding for this. No, we did tap Exim Bank.
Uh-huh.
We did tap.
What interest rates were you being charged?
Oh, we
at
were
the time?
talking of about 5% at that time.
Okay.
LIBOR
Yeah.
was still low at that time.
Yeah.
And then you're talking 25 years at least. You know.
But still pretty high because it was actually 2 to 3% at
Yeah,
that
well,
time.
it depends. You see, as you know, even the financial sector, the international, it's not homogeneous. And
Yeah.
Japan has been, you know, even after IPIRA, you know, even in the 90s, Japan was talking about long-term money for energy.
Yeah.
Except that, you know, but so what I'm saying is, and right now, of course, I think we now have the BRICS, you know, yung,
BRICS Bank.
the BRICS Bank. That,
yeah.
you know, talking a lot, there's
And the AIIB.
AIIB. So
Right.
there are these countries. Well, of course, China is now talking about long-term funds as well. You know, I mean, you can see that international finance. I mean, there were agendas that they were pursuing to maintain economic and political power. And I think there is no, I mean, it's no secret. We talk of the, you know, the Washington consensus.
Yeah.
That's been there. That is, I mean.
But
yeah.
we were trying to weave through those stumbling blocks, like.
Yeah. So now that, for example, you're talking of China, maybe these are the things that provide a leverage. You know.
That's right. Exactly. The period of Marcos didn't have this kind of situation where we can lean on. No?
Yes.
Once the financial institutions, the money lending institutions put pressure on you and threaten you with certain sanctions, you don't have any other choice but to follow them, right? But these periods are different. We now have countries like China, Russia, and they have been organized things like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The BRICS Bank is one of those also. and and the financing is going to be concessional. And then more and more, since China is going to be in a position to do it, more and more government-to-government loans are going to be made available to us, bringing down the cost of money to as low as 2%, 3% per annum. Now, this is very, very important. And it is that time in history that, in our country's history, that we have a leader who can take advantage of this, no, and move the country towards precisely what we're saying as the Renaissance.
Yeah, now that you say that, my other concern is the people around him. You know, the economic managers that are around him still stick to their, their
Mindset.
their mindset
Yeah.
of pursuing really what I call a colonization economics. I mean, this globalization is really something that really just favors the rich and the powerful, and in the world. No? And talking about ODA, I mean official, development assistance, for example, one of the areas that has always been a no-no for the World Bank and IMF has been to provide funding or development financing to industry. This they have, I tried something, this, with Japan. And we started an industry modernization program.
We have 1 minute.
Okay. Anyway, so I guess the bottom line is, let's move towards a renaissance, but we have a good start. We have the president behind that can push this, provide the political will to change these mindsets.
Great.
But I hope that he can also exercise this in the area of economics, not just the politics and international. The economic agenda is something that he has shown he can handle with his common sense. He doesn't need the technical technocracy.
Right. Well, as Art Alvendia was saying, economics is very, very important in coming out with the Renaissance. You cannot actually talk about Renaissance Philippines unless the proper economic program and economic attitude and position are taken. Although it has not been said quite categorically in our discussions here, but it is all over our discussions. The fact that our economic program now, as being designed by our economists, the economic advisors of the president, is private sector-led development. They are moving towards asking the private sector to lead in the development of this country. What we want and what we are suggesting is the government must take a primary role towards economic development. It must take the lead and not allow private sector to come in only in areas where the government allows private sector to come in, should the way our economic program should be designed. We trust the common sense of the president, because if he sees what we're talking about, then he will change that direction. In the same way he had decided to fund and rehabilitate the Bataan nuclear power plant. Thank you for listening in and watching us, and thank you to Harry for allowing us this Citizen National Guard hour for the Talk to Harry. And I am Butch Valdez, and with my friend Art Alvendia, saying good afternoon and see you again next month.